welcome to the first video of 2023. So whether you're new here or a long time viewer, welcome, and we can look forward to a full year together of exciting things. Now, before we get started, remember that we have our shop, and our shop, instead of holding stuff up, because we now have so many things on our shop here or here, I haven't decided where it goes yet. These are the things that you can get in our shop. We have books, we have writing services, we have things to help you with your writing, we have t-shirts, loads of different things. So if you would like to support this channel, pop across to the shop or pop across to our Redbubble shop, and so we've got one on either side. So all the links are down below. You can check it out there. Now, what are we doing this year? What are we doing for our first video? We are doing a writer that I have mentioned once, but we haven't actually talked about his books fully, and that is David Malouf. David Malouf is a writer from Queensland, and the book we are doing is Fly Away Peter. So it's one of his shorter novels. He is a writer from Queensland, as I said. He is Lebanese Australian. I think his grandfather came to Australia, so his family have been here for a very long time. He's an Australian of Lebanese extraction. He's from Queensland. He is primarily known as a poet, though he also writes short fiction, shorter novels, sort of novella-sized things, full-size novels, and non-fiction. And I hope we will be doing some more David Malouf over the course of the year, or certainly into the future we will do more David Malouf. This book is Fly Away Peter. This is actually the first David Malouf. No, it's actually the second David Malouf I read. First David Malouf I read was Ransom. This is the first David Malouf I read that is set in Australia. This is set in Queensland, on the coast, and it surrounds three people. There is Ashley, who is the owner of the land that the first part of the novel more or less takes place on. He's a large landowner. He's come back from England. Where he's been educated, and he becomes interested in the birds of the wetlands when he meets Jim, who spends his days watching the migratory birds. And he meets Jim and is so interested in these birds that he asks Jim to basically keep track of them and write them up in a book for him. Jim comments that he's more interested in the birds once they're in the book than the birds in real life. But Jim becomes sort of not a gamekeeper, because there's no intention of shooting these birds, but sort of a conservator of these birds, a cataloguer. He takes Ashley and his rich friends out to go bird watching. It's Ashley in return lets has one of his friends fly Jim over the wetlands to see from a bird's eye view. And then there's a third person in this book who's called Imogen, who is a wildlife photographer. She is a woman who had come to Australia via England with her brother and had stayed. Her brother had come to Australia attracted by gold mining. Her brother ended up returning back to England, finding not a great time in Australia with the gold mining, but she stayed on, and she supports herself with her income plus photographing the birds. for international publications. So she meets Jim. Well, he's watching the birds and she's photographing them. So it's really quite a fascinating trio, a very unlikely trio. And in this world, we see a lot about the birds. These are the migratory birds predominantly. We're not looking at what we consider, but everyone overseas considers exotic birds, our common as muck things. This is not a world of the kookaburras and the magpies and the indigenous native birds. This is a story of the migratory birds, and therefore it rather has in keeping with the migratory quality of the white Australian settlers who have come to Australia from all over the world, some of whom settle, some of whom leave again, backwards and forwards across vast distances, just as Ashley has gone backwards and forwards from Queensland to England and back, and Europe and back again. Just as Imogen has made that long migration from England to Australia. And is this home? If you're a migratory bird, is this home as an interesting concept? And Jim too will make a migration, not from as an Australian-born individual, as an Australian-born individual who is not moneyed like Ashley, who they have that. I think I spoke about the Anglo-Australians last year, the moneyed Australians who see England as home and move backwards and forwards across the hemispheres. Ashley is a native-born Australian. And so for him, he has no reason to be a migratory bird. These are curiosities to him. This is his home. But he too will take flight and go up to the northern hemisphere where all these birds came from when the war breaks out. And that is probably one of the things that also, that's actually what made me pick up this book in the first place. I used it in the writing of my novel when I was looking at different ways that writers have depicted the First World War, especially Australian writers. But the second half of this novel takes place in Europe, in the battlefields in France, as Jim goes to war. Now, I don't want to spoil the whole thing for you. It's a very short novel. Honestly, like you can read it in an afternoon. So I won't spoil the story. But this idea of migration, of travel, of the two hemispheres being connected by flight, being connected by birds, is a really important aspect of this. Though there is one, quite interestingly, at the end of the book, one of the most fascinating images is not a flight, but of the dead men, the dead Australians in France, digging home. And it made me think of, there are the people who are not attached, the birds, the Ashleys, the Imogens, the people who are not attached to the land. And then there are the people who are attached to the land, who in some ways leave at their own peril. And these are the men, the dead men, who are digging their way back home. The wombats. That is instantly what I thought, because the description of the soil is not the soil of the war zone, not the soil of the no man's land, the soil that is clotted with corpses in various states of decay. This is the soil of growth. It's the soil of the farmer. It's the rich, wholesome soil and the pleasure that the dead men have in digging into it. And it's a really striking image. So it made me think of our native digger, our big native digger, which is the wombat, these beautiful creatures, and they are beautiful. They are beautiful creatures who you do not see very often. But they are part of the landscape, and in digging down, they are part of the earth. They are part of the country. The poor things, when you see them, when you do, one of the places you do often see wombats is at the side of the road after they've been hit, and the poor things look like boxy, upside-down ottomans, the poor creatures. But it's an unbelievably moving and grounded experience after this massive aerial focus for most of the book. The other thing that I really love about this book is, though it is a war story, and Australia has a lot of war stories, it doesn't fall into the typical tropes of the Anzac legend. I will do you a video on books about that in Anzac Week. But it doesn't fall into those tropes. It doesn't fall into the tropes of lions led by donkeys, all of this nationalistic propaganda that was around at the time of the First World War, and then succeeded into that as a way of the Anzac legend, as a way of coping with the incredible grief, the raw, shocking, massive grief that the country experienced in the aftermath of the First World War. This book, rather than create a legend to justify that loss, actually just has the loss. It's as if David Malouf, and this is why I think I emphasize the fact that David Malouf is of Lebanese extraction. He's a Lebanese Australian. He's an outsider. He is able to look at us as us, an outsider, not in terms of an exclusionary, in terms of being an Australian. Absolutely, he is Australian. But he is not someone who has the roots into that Anglo-Celtic tradition that the Anzac legend grew out of. And so as such, he's able to look at the loss, the grief, the decimation that happened as a result of the First World War in a very, very different way. He doesn't have an identity to protect. And so I think this is a startlingly honest, compassionate, and beautiful book. The other thing I would like to say about this book does something that every single creative writer, including me, will tell you do not do. Almost the entire book is using telling. Now, if you have done any kind of creative writing, you would know that the first rule that you get told is show, don't tell. You would also know that showing and telling are the extreme ends of a spectrum. And so most people sit somewhere in the middle. There's that balance between, yes, we have to show some things, yes, we have to tell things. There are things that it is vital that you show. There are also things that it is expedient that you tell. That doesn't mean that you cannot go to either extreme. Okay? The extremes are usable, but the thing to remember is they are extremes. Henry James goes to the extreme of showing. I personally find Henry James the most tedious writer I have ever read. I'm not going to be doing any we're not going to be doing any Henry James on this channel because I cannot finish his books. I find them tedious because I'm shown so much, and it's like, could you not tell me just some of these things to speed things up, Henry? David Malouf, predominantly 95% of this book is telling. Now, by everything that you would have heard any teacher of creative writing tell you, I would tell you, do not do that. Difference is, David Malouf is bloody good at this. David Malouf is a poet. David Malouf has a command of language that shows you exactly how you can tell a story and still have it connect. Part of the reason why we tell students not to tell is because doing nothing but telling makes a story incredibly remote. It makes it incredibly difficult for the reader to connect to the audience. That doesn't mean it can't be done. It can be done. This actually, I will tell you, this is actually a book whose writing style I envy. I would love to be able to use this writing style more extensively in my own writing. I think it is beautiful, but it's incredibly difficult. I don't know if I will ever master that in my lifetime. I have no idea. I doubt I will master it because my own style is quite different. Nevertheless, I can admire it and envy people who can use it. The reason that I do admire it is because seeing it done is so rare. It's just an extraordinarily rare thing to see. It's not a comprehensive universal of David Malouf's writing, but it is something that he uses in this novel to enormous effect. Also, check it out. It's tiny. It is 142 pages, and the narrative is very sparse. That is a good use of telling in that because of those constraints. You have a very sparse narrative and you have a very short narrative. Where telling can, where people will be told don't tell is when they're trying to tell a vast, expansive narrative and they're trying to do it in telling and it's getting crushed. Okay? This works because of its condensedness. It's like a poem. So, there you go. Fly Away, Peter is our first David Malouf novel. It's a beautiful novel. I think it might actually be our first Queensland novel. So there you go. And I highly, highly recommend it. It is a beautiful, beautiful work. And that's all for me today. And I will see you again next time with some more adventures in Australian literature. Bye. If you would like to support this channel, come across to the Black Cockie Press website, www.blackcockiepress.com.au, where you will find books and other writing services to help with your writing.